Please welcome to the stage for our Bringing Precision to Health Longevity Fireside Chat, President for the National Academy of Medicine, Dr. Victor Dzau, and Senior Advisor for the Academy for Healthy Longevity, Dr. Michael Birt.
Well, great. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. This is a rare opportunity and treat for me. It's not often I can actually corral Dr. Dzau for 20 minutes at a time. So I've really been looking forward to this opportunity to talk about healthy longevity and to get the perspective of Dr. Dzau, both as president of the National Academy of Medicine, but also as a globe-trotting clinical scientist as well. So there are a number of questions and things we'd like to discuss. But first, just a sense of what Dr. Dzau has achieved in his career. It's a very illustrious career as a world-class cardiologist, director of two major academic centers, Stanford and Brigham and Women's in Boston. Dr. Dzau has also led the Duke Health System, so has the on-the-ground experience of running an entire health system, president of the National Academy of Medicine, but also I see Dr. Dzau frequently in global settings, so has a great interest in how this projects into the global setting as well, including most recently, we met in Doha, Qatar, where Dr. Dzau was leading an initiative on the Precision Medicine Initiative. So that was a big topic in yesterday's discussion, and it's the perfect setup for our title here, which is Bringing Precision to Healthy Longevity. And I'll come back to why longevity is an important topic in just a second with Dr. Dzau. But let's start with some science, because one of the big problems in longevity is that it suffers from bad science, that there's a tendency for people to resort to some very poor science. But now, in today's world, we're seeing some emerging science that's very good, especially in the genetic field. And one scientist I know who you respect a great deal, Stuart Kim at Stanford, recently wrote an article in a journal that stipulated that human beings age at very different rates, and that as we get older, we become less alike, not more alike. And then he makes the very provocative statement that chronological age is a terrible metric for measuring how people age. Is that, would you care to comment on that and the science and where Stuart Kim would have come from on that comment? Dr. Dzau.
Well, I certainly believe it. I'm only 25 years old, right? I feel like 25 years old. And there's no question that chronological age and biological age are not always tracking one-to-one. I mean, we can give you so many examples. You have your own examples of people who are, you know, a baby boomer, who are maybe in the 70s, who in fact are running marathons and physically active, and yet you would see people in their 50s who have chronic disease, you know, and really living like a chronological age of 78. So I think that's definitely true. And I think what's really exciting in the science is beginning to understand what actually determines a biological age. Chronological age is when we're born, you know, we're given the dates, so that's already defined. But in biological aging, I think that the science is just phenomenal in terms of trying to understand how people age, at what rate and why, and also, of course, the importance of understanding not only the genetics, but also the non-genetic viewpoint. So I don't want to dominate the discussion, but let me just set up the conversation this way.
Please do.
So I think there's, you know, most people would agree that genes do matter, and in fact, there are a good number of studies that show that, you know, if you come from a centenarian, you know, family, you have 17 times more likely to live to 100. And clearly there are these individuals whose genes do matter. But I think as we study the genes, which certainly to a large extent predetermine or influence your biology, lots of things happen beyond this. And probably the data suggest about 70% of aging is really influenced by non-genetic factors. And those non-genetic factors obviously are life's influence in terms of behavior, environment, and education, many other areas that we think about in health, and diet, of course. And importantly, the biology is now beginning to understand how these factors influence the biology, and it's through different mechanisms, for example, as epigenetics. Those mechanisms that influence gene expression that is integrating a lot of information throughout life. As you know, epigenetics can be transgenerational, right? The mother's epigenetics frequently influence, in fact, the fetus and other growth. So now we have the ability to measure epigenetics through, they call it DNA methylation, histone methylation, acetylation, where actually it turns out they are better predictors of biologic age than of the chronologic per se. So if you plot chronologic age and biologic age, it's a linear line, of course, but there's a lot of variability, right? Those variabilities are better predicted, in fact, by epigenetics, DNA methylation. In fact, someone calls them the biologic, the aging clock, if you will.
Well, that's a very exciting opportunity. I'd like to come back to that in a moment, that how that science and the precision medicine behind that can link with connected health to provide some very real ways of measuring that human variability and then playing it out into to real daily life. So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, age is just a number, right? Well, now we know it's a wrong number. And really what the opportunity here is to begin developing those metrics and the precision that would help our society actually deal with age as a modifiable set of coordinates.
Right. My guess is going to be that you need to measure many different parameters to get it right. I mean, when you talk precision medicine, it's thought that if you measure one thing and you got that one thing right, you can precisely predict what's your disease predisposition, your response to drug, and that's probably an oversimplification. I know you've got some discussion yesterday about the personalized medicine. It's likely that there are tools which are more predictive than what we have today, but those will be an integration of many different information. Some are more powerful predictor than others, but when you put them all together, that's going to be more predictive. So that's why connected health is so important, being able to measure different things. And we can talk about what kind of things do we need to measure.
Sure. So let me shift gears just slightly and why this is so important, why longevity and healthy longevity really stands as the critical challenge and opportunity of the 21st century. And that's the demographics and epidemiology of aging throughout the world. So Americans know that roughly 78 million baby boomers are already and beginning to enter retirement. But what most Americans don't realize is just how profoundly the rest of the world is aging. Japan is already at 27% over the age of 65 and on its way to 40% in just a few years. Japan is just the first on that escalator, Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and most importantly, China, just by virtue of the size of its population. So epidemiology, demography, but we're even seeing on the economy where recently a group of Fed economists accounted for America's decline in economic growth as a direct result of aging and demography. So for policymakers, getting this right is important, but it also means for health systems and scientists, this is the biggest opportunity of the 21st century to make a difference in how human society could live. Would you care to comment? You travel all over the world, so it's...
I grew up in Hong Kong, and I was just in Hong Kong. They tell me that the life expectancy is now 86 years. Glad I grew up there. Maybe it can transfer some of it to me now, but you can imagine it's one of the longest, life expectancy in the world, and certainly in Japan and many others. So I think that won't be surprising within the next 20 years. You see a lot of people who pass 100 years old. Biologically, it's possible to live that long. I think the question really frequently is, then what? In living longer, are you living healthier? You know, are you going to be a burden on society, or you can be a healthy, productive member of society? And I think hence the biology of longevity and aging is not so much how much longer you live. I think we're all going to live longer, is how well you live. And if you understand how to prevent the infirmities of aging, et cetera, that's where I think the field is going.
And there's a very interesting metric that's being developed for that. Chris Murray and the WHO on health-adjusted life expectancy is what I hope more than life expectancy itself will become a metric for helping us deal with that. So longevity has become a big issue, an important topic, and the National Academy of Medicine has jumped into that space in a major way with a grand challenge that you launched just last month, I believe.
Sure.
So,
by the way, we used to be known as the Institute of Medicine, IOM. Many of you know us that way. But a year and a half ago, we changed the name. We have a change in the Constitution. Because historically, the IOM was part of National Academy of Science. As many of you know, National Academy of Science was chartered by Congress and Abraham Lincoln in 1863 to become an independent body to advise the government on science and related issues. So some 50 years ago, health became increasingly more important, and so the idea of creating the Institute of Medicine within the National Academy of Science, and now we have reconstituted, now there are 3 academies, Academy of Sciences, Academy of Engineering, Academy of Medicine. So with the old IOM, if you will. So, you know, I've been now president for 2.5 years of first IOM and now NAM. And of course, lots of what we do, as you know, is to advise the nation on important issues. We've taken on many issues. Many of you know about the air is human, crossing the equality chasm, and many others. More recently, end-of-life care down in America. So, you know, the way we look at it is we got to serve the nation and globally in taking on and tackling issues that you care about, the public cares about, and frequently the government cares about too, so that we can recommend changes. And that's what we do. So since I come on board, I said, okay, aside from doing these really important reports and convening groups, one of the things we should do is to take on an inspirational role, because after all, where are the organizations in this country that can really say, let's come together and solve a problem? You know, we could be one of those. So in thinking through this, we created the idea of a grand challenge, you know, similar to the Gates Foundation and others, to say, what would be the big topic the nation cares about or globally, and how can we bring people together to leapfrog and find solutions? Well, needless to say, we quickly gravitated to aging and longevity, right? Huge burden, you know, huge burden for the healthcare system, for society, and yet possibly huge opportunity to take people like us with great experience and still energy to be a great contributor. And now in this new environment of, you know, the new government, all the more reason we ought to think about how to energize the nation on a common problem. So hence the grand challenge. Now, what's a grand challenge? Well, you know, you can define different ways. Well, the Gates Foundation, I thought, was a very good model. The Gates Foundation says, we want to solve a problem. We're going to throw it out there with opportunities to provide funding and therefore, and the prices that if you reach the grand challenge, as the MacArthur Foundation is also doing, you get this big prize. So we're working towards the idea that, you know, in aging and longevity, there's an opportunity to mobilize people like yourself with biologists, with, you know, others, engineers to come together to solve a problem. And so the idea would be to create a series of catalyst awards to get people started. You know, bold ideas, out-of-box ideas, and then to have them, help them get to proof of concept, and then reach for the big prize, which would be, you know, $5 million or more. It's still in the works, right? But the idea is to bring different people together. So we think about What are the opportunities in aging? Well, first, biology. We talked about this. You know, there's lots of evidence now in animal models identifying the genes that determine aging and longevity, and if they interfere with the genes, these animal models live much longer, but not longer, but biologically behaving much longer. So it's possible genetically to modify this. I talk about epigenetics. I talk about many issues which we're going to talk about. There's also sociologic. Think about the environment that the elderly live and designing the wonderful home for the elderly, you know, with the kind of connected care models that you have to make them more productive, more mobile, more active. And of course, technology. So we're not biased in any way. We want to bring people together, all different sectors, to say, wow, here's an opportunity. Let's see if we can come together to solve this problem for society.
It's very exciting to think of that. I come from Seattle, and I have worked with the Gates Foundation extensively, and Tachi Yamada, who was president of Global Health and who I think was helped in the conceptualization of this grand challenge. And we really have seen some profound changes happen as a result of these grand challenges. So it's very exciting, and it's a great way to kind of mobilize an entire community, people who may not even recognize they're part of the community, but have knowledge and capabilities that we could begin inviting into this. So that was launched, semi-officially last month?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look at what people usually talk about campaigns, you go through what is known as a silent phase before you go public. So we kind of did it as semi-silent, semi-public. We went to Silicon Valley and had this meeting where we had about 150 some, you know, major donors and people who are really interested in, you know, they're wealthy, they are entrepreneurs. They say, whoa, this is a great chance to bring best science to an area. So that's how we begin to take the scientific academy side to the private sector and to begin to think about how to design such a grand challenge and how to create the resources to do so. Over the next year or so, we're going to try to take it to different cities and to engage more people. And we're already now in the midst of creating a design team. Design team is going to think about how and what, and eventually when we're ready, we'll be going public to say, here's the criteria, here's what you ought to be doing, and that's when we begin to truly launch and select out those who are likely to begin the whole exciting journey of trying to find leapfrog ideas for aging and longevity.
Well, this is very exciting for me as a gerontologist who's been working in the field for 25 years. That it didn't often get the attention that it is getting now, and what we're seeing is thanks to these kinds of efforts through the National Academy of Medicine, we're really raising it to a high-profile level, but resources behind it. And the science, I think, that's emerging, and as you can see from the connected health community, real opportunities to bring that together. So that's a great segue for me to announce something of our own, which is, as Dr. Patty Michelle mentioned this morning, we are launching the Academy for Healthy Longevity as part of the Personal Connected Health Alliance and under the HIMSS umbrella. And the idea is really to harness the power of connected health to build more precise tools to help people live longer, healthier lives. And I think the opportunity to work together with the National Academy of Medicine is just a perfect opportunity to bring these groups together. We are already looking, I think, at the opportunity. We discussed, Dr. Dzau and I, that to write or co-author an op-ed or perspective piece on how we could precision medicine and precision health might come together in exactly that fashion to kind of put together a roadmap for how we could do this. We also are looking in 2017, it was announced this morning, the Personal Connected Health Alliance, together with the Partners Symposium in Boston, will be held in Boston this year. I think it would be a great place to begin thinking of how we could convene a group of leaders around this kind of academy idea plus the grand challenge to see what we might do to kind of continue this, especially with the clinical prowess that Boston and Partners and other groups bring in Boston. And lastly, I think the global dimension of this. So as we travel around the world, the science that's emerging in Japan, in China, Korea, Europe, we know the UK would be interested in this. What we hope is we can harness some of the global dimension, some of the global power of this, since longevity is such an important topic that could be. So one last question for Dr. Dzau is, so 2020, 2030, where do you think we can be with grand challenges such as you're launching? What's the vision for us? And
I have a lot of questions, and when I think about how do we find answers so that they can become solutions, clearly that we have a lot of information that we just don't have. So I believe in what you do in collecting the connected information is critically important. For example, I would say that if you look at physiology, and I'm a physiologist, at least by training, much of what we do is homeostasis, trying to achieve that level of balance. So when something goes over, you go back to homeostasis. And we all know that when we get older, our homeostatic mechanisms are somewhat impaired. You take the elderly who stand up, and the blood pressure drops. You don't have the kind of reflex mechanism. And, that we see. So, but it goes all the way to individual cells and homeostasis. So the question is, what kind of biomarkers can we measure to look at the response of a cell or tissue or body to changes day to day, minute to minute, and in response to stress? Very important. Right. And I think by collecting the right information, obviously we'll be able to begin to get some insight. The other thing that really I've been thinking a lot about is capacity, reserve, and resilience. After all, if you think about this, most of the people we know elderly are doing, I know many people doing really well, 85, 86, functioning well. Pneumonia, hip fracture, some recover and some just go rapidly downhill. So it's like a bank account. You're doing fine until suddenly you're stressed, suddenly you realize that resilience is not there. The question is, how do you measure that, right? And how do you actually increase that capacity? So there's a lot of things which is a combination, in my mind, of biomarkers, measure inflammatory markers, measuring whatever you can measure, genes, epigenetics, to day-to-day behavioral issues, to environmental issues that you can measure, and to be able to assess that data looking at people's responses to different stresses, et cetera. That is probably going to be very important. So 2020, I hope our grand challenge is going to get a lot of people together to say we can solve this problem by bringing the engineers, the biologists, the clinicians, the information people, device people together, and hopefully it's not going to be one answer, but a constellation of data that can give you much greater prediction, and also being able to look at, drug response, adherence to drugs, many other things that can make the longevity and aging much healthier process.
Right. Well, thank you. That's a very exciting vision, and the work itself is going to be fascinating to do. I think we really have some new tools and a new platform to begin working together.
By the way, I thought you and I are going to try to introduce a new term called precision longevity or something like that.
Okay,
right?
Well, it's now officially launched. That's good. So I think that combination of biomarkers and the ability to, and resilience that's been measured socially, how we could begin combining that would be a great addition to the aging field and longevity field.
Yeah, so if I just want to say one last point, if you have those measures and you can measure someone younger, but you can actually see those measures that can predict what's in the future, then intervention becomes, and what intervention to take becomes very important, right? So it's both a ability to measure predicting longevity or the lack of longevity. It's an ability to predict, although you may live much longer, but you're going to have more chronic disease, and therefore the early prevention. So it puts a different way of looking at, getting starting in the 30, 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds in thinking about how you're going to age much healthier in the long run by being able to find those markers and start early.
Very exciting. Well, I'm grateful for the 20 minutes we've had. I would have preferred 40, but Dr. Dzau is off to India, Hong Kong, and China tonight. But thank you very much for spending this time with us, and please join me in thanking Dr. Dzau.